Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are steering clear of the battle maps. We're going straight into the heart of a psychological conflict, one that was fought and won deep inside the American heartland during the Second World War.
That's right. And for this, we are diving into a stack of truly extraordinary archival material. I mean, we've got everything from secret diaries and private letters to these incredibly detailed U.S. Army intelligence reports.
And they're all focused on one thing.
Yes, all focused on the psychological and really the ideological transformation of hundreds of thousands of German prisoners of war captured during WW2.
Okay, let's unpack this incredible story. We constantly discuss the Allied victory in terms of military might, the bombs, the tanks, the troop movements.
Usual stuff.
Exactly. But the core question driving this deep dive is, I think, far more compelling. It's how did the United States manage to completely defeat Nazi ideology? Not just with military force, but through the overwhelming, crushing, inescapable evidence of its own society.
Its democratic industrial capacity and a standard of living that was just completely off the charts from their perspective.
That's a fascinating case study.
It is. And what's so striking about these sources is that the German defeat, in their own minds, it wasn't about direct coercion or re-education lectures, at least not at first. No, it was about relentless daily observation. The sources document this systematic ideological collapse that was triggered by the simple, inescapable truth of American abundance.
And we have the perfect entry point for this, a really dramatic moment captured in a secret diary. We can start this entire realization on June 4th, 1943.
Okay, where are we?
We're in Mexia, Texas. A German soldier, Unteroffizier Burkhardt, is recording his first impression of America right after stepping off a train. And he writes this incredible line. He says, "The Americans must be lying to us. No nation could possess such abundance while fighting a war on two fronts."
That one sentence, that just encapsulates the entire struggle, doesn't it?
It's everything.
You have to understand the foundation of the worldview these soldiers had. Their propaganda machine had spent years, portraying the United States as economically collapsed, racially mongrelized, and just decadent.
A failed state, basically.
Totally. They were indoctrinated to believe that any outward display of American wealth was an elaborate, cynical lie, a show just for foreign consumption.
But the lie was unmasked in seconds. What was it that shattered his entire worldview right there on Railroad Street in rural Texas? It was light.
Light.
Burkhardt describes what he saw at 10 o'clock at night as an endless constellation of electricity stretching across the Texas plains.
And that contrast is just essential for you to grasp. In Germany in 1943, they had been under strict total blackout regulations since 1940.
Right, to protect from Allied bombing?
Of course.
Yeah.
But even more than that, if you looked at German infrastructure, especially rural Germany, it was sparse. Barely 20% of German farms had electricity before the war.
And now resources were stretched thinner than ever.
Thinner than ever. So to see Texas farms, rural, peripheral America blazing with light and factories running full night shifts when America was supposedly rationing everything for the war, it was a physical impossibility by their standards.
It was a visible contradiction that just undermined years of propaganda in a single glance. And crucially, who was this arriving? This wasn't just any group of soldiers.
No, this contingent included about 8,850 veterans of Erwin Rommel's famous Afrika Korps.
So the elite.
These were not just any soldiers. These were hardened fighters, Iron Cross holders, Rommel's most experienced desert veterans. Their beliefs were rigid, and their systematic demolition of that Nazi faith began right there, written not in battle plans, but in production statistics and infrastructural realities they just could not argue against.
Okay, so let's trace this journey. It starts with military defeat, but it ends in this ideological revelation. We have to begin with the colossal mass surrender in North Africa.
Right. May 13th, 1943. The Axis forces finally collapse in Tunisia.
And this results in the capture of, what was the number?
It's staggering. Between 250,000 and 275,000 German and Italian soldiers. It was one of the largest mass surrenders in modern history.
Wow.
And among those captured was a man named Hedmund Friedrich Radke, an Iron Cross first-class holder. His meticulous diary became a critical historical source for historians trying to map this psychological shift.
So the initial shock for these soldiers, it wasn't just the surrender itself, which must have been painful enough.
Oh, absolutely. But it was the sheer, almost clinical organizational capacity of the enemy processing them. They were routed to ththese temporary holding cages near Oran in Algeria.
And the processing was efficient?
The sources detail that the U.S. Army processed thousands of prisoners daily with a bureaucratic precision that the Wehrmacht, even at its absolute height of power in 1940, could never consistently maintain.
And you see this in the intelligence reports, right? The level of standardization is astounding.
It is. Identity cards photographed and filed, full medical exams, inoculations,
Right.
and crucially, their Geneva Convention rights explained to them.
In fluent German.
In fluent German, by specially trained American officers. This just speaks to a deeply standardized, professional, and incredibly well-resourced bureaucracy.
And that precision extended to their most basic need, food.
Immediately. There's a letter from an Oberreuter, Hans Miller, written 8 months later, where he's recalling the rations they got in that cage at Oran. He said the Americans fed them better there than they had eaten in 6 months of desert warfare.
What were they eating?
White bread, real coffee, meat twice a day.
And they thought this was a trick.
Of course.
Mm-mm.
They immediately assumed it was a cynical, short-term propaganda stunt. You know, a brief moment of luxury to make them talk. They just could not fathom that this was the standard American military ration.
So they were getting the bare minimum that America considered acceptable for a frontline soldier.
And it was a feast compared to what the Wehrmacht was struggling to provide its most elite troops. It showed them right away that the scale of American resource management was already incomprehensible.
And then came the transportation to the U.S., and this journey itself, it wasn't just a physical move, it was a passage on what you could call an industrial monument.
The Liberty ships. This is where we need to stop and let the numbers sink in, because the vessels themselves were proof of America's insane manufacturing speed.
So they're loaded onto these cargo vessels, ships that symbolized efficiency.
Consider the most famous example, the SS Robert E. Peary. It was built at the Kaiser shipyards in California in, get this, 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes.
Less than 5 days to build a 14,000-ton ocean-going cargo vessel.
I mean, that's a figure that, had the Germans heard it in Berlin, they would have dismissed it as Soviet-level fantasy propaganda.
But they were sailing on them.
They were sailing on them. They learned these vessels were being produced at a rate of 3 per day at peak production, and these ships were mostly moving supplies to Europe and then on the way back.
They brought the POWs.
They returned carrying up to 30,000 POWs a month by the summer of 1943. The logistical feedback loop was just flawless. War material out, prisoners back.
And that 2-week Atlantic crossing, that was like phase 2 of the psychological demolition. It was a floating classroom. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann, he observed something critical that really drilled home this concept of limitless supply.
Food waste.
Food waste.
This specific observation from Zimmermann's journal is so powerful. He noted that the American crew threw away more food daily, just tossing it into the Atlantic, than his entire company had received in weekly rations in North Africa.
We're talking about half-eaten steaks.
Whole loaves of fresh white bread, gallons of milk just thrown away openly, and his conclusion is the key.
Right.
Zimmermann wrote that they did this without thought. Not to mock the prisoners, but because to the Americans, this waste meant nothing. Their supply was truly limitless. The waste itself became the most powerful argument for America's industrial depth.
So the ships themselves became these involuntary industrial tours.
Exactly. The prisoners learned that the vessel carrying them wasn't some special flagship. It was one of 2,710 Liberty ships built during the war.
Each one requiring 250,000 components.
Manufactured across 32 separate states, then synchronized and assembled on the coast. Just pause and consider the logistics of that.
Engines from Ohio, rudders from Pennsylvania, shipped by rail, all arriving just in time at a shipyard that barely existed 18 months earlier.
That kind of dispersed, efficient, synchronized manufacturing was fundamentally alien to the centralized, strained German system.
And then there's the technological superiority.
Yes, observed by Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Stobern. He's an aristocratic officer, long military family tradition. As they neared the U.S. coast, he sees the rotating radar antenna above the bridge
Of a cargo vessel.
Yeah. The Germans, even the British, they thought this was technology they possessed in limited quantities for specialized warships. And yet here it was, standard equipment on a common freighter.
And for a professional soldier like von Stobern, that detail is the tipping point.
Absolutely. He later wrote that it was at that moment, seeing advanced radar casually applied to a simple commercial vessel, that he first suspected Germany had already lost the war.
A massive psychological surrender.
Driven purely by technology and production, long before he ever saw an American factory. And that suspicion, sparked by the radar, it became an undeniable certainty when they finally made landfall. August 2nd, 1943. at the Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia.
The sheer physical sight of America's arsenal in action just shatters the last remnants of that Nazi propaganda.
The scale is, it's just staggering. Norfolk Naval Base sprawled across 4,300 acres. According to the U.S. records, this single port handled more tonnage in one day than the entire German port of Hamburg managed in an entire week.
In a single day.
In a single day. There's an account from a Gerfreiter, Johann Weber, a former factory worker from the Ruhr. He kept a meticulous count. He saw 47 cargo ships and naval vessels loading or unloading simultaneously.
And the technology there, the cranes.
He noted that the massive cranes moved smoothly, continuously on electric power. They could lift loads in minutes that would have required a dozen men and horses and hours of labor back home. Germany's industrial engine was running on rationed coal. America's was running on what seemed like limitless clean electricity.
And as they marched toward the trains, they were exposed to civilian prosperity, which was maybe even more shocking than the military efficiency.
It was. They passed these vast parking lots filled with hundreds of shining, new-looking civilian automobiles. And they belonged to ordinary dock workers and clerks.
Which completely invalidated a core piece of Nazi economic propaganda.
Completely. The regime had promised the German people the people's car, the Volkswagen, but it remained a propaganda dream. It was never really produced until after the war. Private car ownership in Germany was for the wealthy, the party elite.
So seeing ordinary laborers drive their own cars to work?
It just demolished the narrative of a decadent, class-divided America. It showed a level of prosperity for the common man that was simply unthinkable back home.
And the transportation itself, it wasn't the 40 and 8 cattle cars they were used to?
Not at all. They were put onto full passenger coaches, Pullman cars with padded seats, dining cars with white tablecloths, observation cars. Rodka, the diarist, he wrote that they boarded like tourists, not prisoners of war.
And this leads to what I think is the peak moment of luxury shock.
Oh, the air conditioning.
The air conditioning. An American sergeant apologizes to the German officers because the air conditioning isn't working properly in their car.
Can you even imagine? This was a technology these men believed existed only on Adolf Hitler's personal train.
So it's the height of totalitarian luxury.
Exactly. And the sources highlight this seemingly minor detail because it illustrates an everyday convenience in America. The casualness, the apology just cemented the magnitude of the difference. What was a basic comfort here was utterly unattainable there.
So that subsequent 3-day train journey from the Atlantic coast across the heartland to the camps in Texas and Oklahoma, that was arguably more destructive to Nazi ideology than the military defeat.
It truly was a rolling revelation. It was proof of concept that no intelligence report could ever counter. As they traveled through small towns, Martinsville, Greensboro, Roanoke, the American landscape was just ablaze.
Illuminated shop windows, massive electric signs.
In factories, running full night shifts, with parking lots overflowing with cars, even at midnight.
There's an account from an Obergrader Murr, whose father was a fanatical Nazi bloc leader. He wrote that dozens of cities they passed that first night had more electricity than all of Hamburg.
And Hamburg was one of Germany's largest industrial centers. He just couldn't square that fact with the narrative of American scarcity.
And they saw the technological sophistication during railway stops, too.
Yes. In Roanoke, Virginia, they watched railway workers performing tasks, automated coal loaders, electric pumps in 30 minutes that would take in a huge crew 2 hours in Germany. It wasn't just more resources, but the American ability to automate labor, a vastly superior industrial philosophy.
And what really struck the engineers among the POWs was the carelessness that came with this infinite resource.
Right. The railway workers wore leather boots worth 2 months of a German laborer's wages. They drank Coca-Cola, which was a huge luxury item, and just discarded the empties. They smoked expensive cigarettes continuously, often throwing them out half-finished.
That visible waste.
It was a form of power. A failed weeble named Heinrich Müller, an electrical engineer, he did the math. He figured the single railway yard they stopped in used more electricity in 1 hour than his entire district in Berlin used in a day.
And he described the waste as
magnificent. He called it the carelessness of infinite resource.
That's a stunning description. It's a completely new definition of power for these men. Power isn't about conservation, which was the German model. It's about generating so much you don't have to worry about the excess.
Precisely. And as the trains moved deeper into the country, they started to see the true behemoths of the arsenal of democracy.
Like the Alcoa aluminum plant in Tennessee,
which stretched 3 miles along the riverbank. It consumed a mind-boggling 175,000 kilowatts of power. That is more electricity than the entire city of Munich,
The entire city.
a city of over 700,000 people. Or look at the synthetic rubber complex, Rubbertown, in Kentucky. 4 massive plants sprung up from empty fields in 18 months, producing 800,000 tons a year.
And this is a technology Germany invented.
Germany invented the synthetic rubber process and was totally reliant on it because of the British blockade. Yet, despite prioritizing it, Germany never managed more than 120,000 tons in its best year, often with forced labor.
And there was a chemist among them who recognized this.
Oberleutnant Erich Hoffmann. He'd worked for IG Farben, the industrial heart of the Nazi war machine. He recognized the superior advanced technology in the American facilities immediately. He knew then the technological gap wasn't closing, it was widening exponentially.
But I think the single most demoralizing sight for the German military mind, especially the pilots, had to be Ford's Willow Run factory.
Oh, Willow Run. This single factory, built just for the B-24 Liberator bomber. At its peak, it churned out one B-24 every 63 minutes.
Every 63 minutes.
It employed 42,000 workers and used more electricity than the entire German city of Cologne.
And a captured Luftwaffe pilot, Hupman Verley, saw it from the train.
He did. He watched 17 B-24s in various stages of completion. The propaganda had told him American planes were inferior, hastily built. But seeing the clinical precision of the mile-long assembly lines, he realized the terrifying truth.
They weren't inferior.
They were simply built faster and in greater numbers than the German mind could even conceive. The propaganda of inferior American quality was just destroyed by the visual evidence of overwhelming quality and speed. So as the journey went deeper, the shock shifts from heavy industry to food and agriculture. And this is where the contrast with a hunger-ravaged Germany was the most existentially acute.
Crossing the Mississippi River was another one of these powerful, symbolic moments.
They saw barges carrying more grain than Germany's entire 1942 harvest.
Yeah.
Massive grain elevators along the banks, each holding enough to feed a German city for months.
And there's that poignant diary entry from Unterscharfschütz Karl Schmidt.
Yes, he came from a farming family. He watched a crane load a single barge with enough wheat to feed his entire village for 5 years. But he fixated on the crane operator.
An ordinary American man.
Eating a sandwich with meat, thicker than the weekly ration he was supposed to share with his whole family back home.
That small detail, the thickness of the meat, it says everything. It's not a statistic. It's a visceral, emotional reality.
Absolutely. And the contrast peaked in Kansas City at the massive stockyards. Tens of thousands of cattle. These POWs who had been subsisting on maybe 200 grams of meat a week, if they were lucky.
They're watching American workers eat meat like they wish they could eat bread.
It's a complete reversal of their expectations. And you have that great anecdote about the guard buying hamburgers.
Right. He buys 20 hamburgers for the prisoners, paying 15 cents each with a single dollar bill.
And this wasn't a special luxury handout. This was normal food, bought without a thought. It showed a cost and accessibility of basic necessities that was just unimaginable in Germany.
And then they arrive at the camps, which provided the next layer of this cognitive demolition.
Proving that this abundance extended even to their enemies. Camp Hearn in Texas, for example, built in 4 months. And the barracks had electric lights, flush toilets, hot showers, steam heat.
For many of them, these conditions were better than what they'd known as civilians.
Objectively better. And the medical facilities compounded the shock. Colonel Dr. Friedrich Bauer, a chief surgeon, documented that the camp hospital was better equipped than most German civilian hospitals he'd worked in.
And they had penicillin.
The miracle drug. In Germany, it was just a rumor. They were still struggling with basic sulfa drugs. Yet here, the Americans were using penicillin freely, even for minor infections on enemy prisoners.
That speaks volumes about resource security and just the humanitarian standard.
It does. And the camp kitchen became its own bizarre classroom in prosperity. Feldwebel Otto Krebs, a former hotel chef, wrote that he sometimes wept when he had to throw away perfectly good food.
Because of American regulations.
Right, designed to ensure Geneva Convention compliance. They had to prepare 10% excess to guarantee full rations for everyone. And the surplus was just discarded. Krebs noted he threw away more good quality food than his family had seen in 3 years of rationing.
And then, as labor shortages mounted, the POWs were sent to work on farms. They got a first-hand look at rural America.
Yes, at a cotton gin outside Houston, a POW named Herbert Lang saw a single machine process more cotton in an hour than his entire village could handle in a month.
And the gin was powered by electricity.
From the Colorado River Authority, 90% of Texas farms were electrified by 1943. Lang noted that the farmer who owned the gin was nobody special, just an ordinary man.
Yet he had electricity, running water, a truck, a car, a tractor.
And its American workers, including African Americans, ate better than German industrial workers. Lang realized this was considered normal, average life. It just directly contradicted the Nazi narrative that only the racially superior or the party elite could access such comfort.
It showed that prosperity was broadly distributed.
The scale of mechanization continued to shock them in the Midwest. In Nebraska sugar beet fields, they'd hear farmers casually talk about yields 60 bushels of wheat per acre compared to Germany's average of 30.
And there's that story of the farmer's son.
A 16-year-old kid driving a massive modern tractor worth more than Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann's father, a skilled craftsman, had earned in his entire lifetime.
But the most devastating psychological blow, the one that caused genuine mental anguish, came in California's Central Valley.
It did. Prisoners assigned to farm labor watched workers discard perfectly good fruit, oranges, peaches for minor blemishes.
Or they'd plow entire crops under to maintain market prices.
To men who had lived through years of severe rationing, who knew their families at home were desperate for food, seeing this deliberate destruction of mountains of perfect produce, it was a moment of profound psychological breakdown.
It was the ultimate proof.
The ultimate strategic proof of unlimited resources. They had so much food that destroying it for economic reasons was an option. This confirmed, more than any bomb or factory, that the war was a pointless, desperate struggle against an inexhaustible foe.
So this cumulative daily barrage of contradictory evidence, it led to what American intelligence officers started calling the ideological collapse syndrome.
Right, and it was fully manifesting by the winter of 1943. The facts were just too great to ignore. The Special Projects Division, which ran the secret re-education programs, they documented a significant behavioral shift.
They just stopped arguing.
Prisoners stopped arguing when shown production statistics. There was nothing left to debate. Loyalty to Germany often remained, but all talk of victory just ceased. An intelligence officer reported that the most fanatical Nazis had become eerily quiet because they had simply seen too much truth.
And that internal change began to reflect outwardly in the camp newspapers.
Yes, like Der Ruf the Call at Fort Kearney. The tone gradually shifted. They moved from defiant nationalism to serious discussions of democracy, economics, and what a post-war reconstruction might look like. They were preparing for a post-Nazi future.
And there's that perfect quote from Lieutenant Hermann Goetz.
Oh, it's incredible. His father was deeply involved in the party. And he said later, "We were told America was a mongrel nation, weak, divided. Every day I am here, I see the opposite. This is the most organized, unified, and powerful nation on earth. We were told fairy tales by criminals."
This is where the narrative pivots, isn't it? Because the most devastating blow to Nazi racial and political ideology didn't come from a factory, but from American humanity.
And its adherence to international law. Specifically, the treatment of Italian POWs after Italy's surrender in September 1943.
What happened there?
When Italy dropped out of the Axis, the status of Italian prisoners changed drastically. They were given better treatment, increased pay, more freedom. Some were even allowed to work off base, date American women.
And the German POWs are watching this.
They're watching their former allies treated not as enemies, but as potential future friends. And they realized, as one wrote, that this democracy they were taught to despise appears more honorable than our own system.
And then came Christmas, 1943, this collective civilian act of kindness.
This just shattered Nazi racial theory like nothing else could. American churches and local communities sent over 500,000 packages, cigarettes, candy, books, to men who were literally trying to kill their sons overseas. Churches performed carols in German for them.
That kind of generosity is just psychologically disarming.
It is. Oberleutnant Walter Mueller summarized it perfectly. He said, "What kind of people treat enemies this way? Only those absolutely certain of victory and secure in their power."
It proved American strength wasn't born of racial hatred or fear,
but of profound self-assured confidence and a humanitarian belief. And the Christmas dinner itself became a legend. Turkey, ham, pies, ice cream. The guards confirmed it was just a normal American Christmas dinner.
Which led one Feldwebel to wonder what American soldiers must be eating if their prisoners ate like kings.
This relentless exposure to knowledge and prosperity fueled this absolute thirst for learning among the prisoners. By early 44, the education program just exploded.
Over 40,000 POWs were enrolled.
In English, history, political science, math, advanced sciences. Universities like Stanford and the University of Chicago sent professors.
And the generosity of spirit here is just immense. HBTM, Dr. Wilhelm von Braun, a captured physicist, he attended lectures on advanced atomic physics.
Taught by American professors, often including Jewish refugees from Germany who had escaped the Nazis. And these scholars taught advanced concepts without any trace of hatred, sharing knowledge with their enemies.
That is completely incomprehensible to a mind shaped by Nazi ideology.
It showed that American strength came from universal knowledge and freedom of inquiry, not from hoarding secrets behind walls of racial dogma.
And the American self-criticism they were exposed to through Hollywood films was equally shocking.
They were shown films like Gone with the Wind, showing America suffering defeat and recovering, and critically, The Grapes of Wrath, showing poverty and political conflict.
And one lieutenant wrote, "They hide nothing, yet this honesty makes them stronger, not weaker."
In Nazi Germany, such internal criticism meant a death sentence. Here, it was a function of a healthy democracy. So, spring of 1944. This marks the absolute peak of American war production and the final demolition of any lingering hope among the prisoners.
Because now they're often employed in local industries under guard, right? They're witnessing the full might of the arsenal of democracy.
At the Higgins Boat Factory in New Orleans, for example, POWs watched 20,000 workers, including thousands of women and African Americans operating complex machinery, assemble 700 landing craft per month.
700 a month.
One Stabseld Weibull noted production never stopped. 3 shifts, 247. They produced more landing craft in a single month than the entire German Navy had been able to construct in a year.
And that visual of a democratic, diverse workforce achieving that.
It just crushed the Nazi racial narrative that only a racially pure state could achieve such efficiency. And the raw material supply that fed this machine was staggering. Republic Steel in Ohio produced 10,000 tons of steel daily.
Which was more than the entire Ruhr industrial complex at its peak.
Yes, an Oberscharfreiter who had worked at Krupp before the war was just stunned. He noted that American workers routinely complained about overtime while producing quantities Germany couldn't achieve even with slave labor.
Then came the definitive military moment, D-Day, June 6, 1944.
The news of the sheer scale of the invasion, 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men in the first wave, it just demonstrated logistical capacity beyond Germany's wildest dreams.
One of the officers wrote that day.
Friedrich von Tauben. He wrote, "We knew then that everything was lost, not just the war, but the entire Nazi project. We had challenged the world's greatest industrial power with fairy tales and racial mythology."
And the evidence of our delusion was now landing on the beaches of France.
And then the final catastrophic psychological floor dropped out in April 1945.
The concentration camp footage.
American authorities showed the prisoners' footage of the newly liberated camps. And men who had maintained a sense of German military honor were forced to confront the ultimate evil of the regime they had served.
Headman Walter Schmidt captured the horror.
He did. We thought we were warriors for a great cause. We discovered we were tools of criminals. The Americans we called weak and decadent showed us what civilization actually meant.
And this transformation continued even after the war's end, marked by this extraordinary American humanity.
When Gearfighter Hans Miller's son died in the Hamburg bombing, the American camp commander offered personal solemn condolences. When another lieutenant's wife struggled to feed her family, American church groups voluntarily sent food packages
To his enemy civilian family.
It was a critical policy choice. They separated the German people from the Nazi regime, treating the defeated soldiers not as enemies to be crushed, but as potential future citizens who would rebuild Europe.
And that preparation for Reconstruction, it started immediately. It was the blueprint for the Marshall Plan.
It was. American authorities provided vocational training, agricultural education, and intensive political instruction in democratic governance. They were effectively training the future leaders of West Germany.
So when the 371,683 German POWs were finally repatriated, they carried back not just memories of defeat, but vital, specific knowledge.
Knowledge of how a democratic industrial society functioned. Mass production techniques, efficient supply chains. This knowledge was foundational for the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle of West Germany.
These former POWs rose to prominence.
And they explicitly implemented the American methods they had learned. Hans Kroll became the key ambassador to the U.S. in peacekeeping. Walter Hallstein became the first president of the European Commission. They consciously modeled their post-war structures on the efficient, organized democracy they had witnessed firsthand.
Hans Kroll summarized it perfectly.
He did. We learned that prosperity came from freedom, not conquest. The democracy created wealth. The diversity brought strength.
And that industrial capacity was the true measure of a great nation.
The endurance of this transformation is maybe best illustrated by the 1985 reunion in Austin, Texas. Over 500 former POWs returned.
And former Oberscharfreiter Hans Van noted, We discovered running water, central heating, and abundant food. But more than that, we discovered dignity.
And Herman Gutz delivered the keynote address, summing it all up. We came to America as enemies, as Nazis, as believers in a lie. We left as friends, as Democrats, as men who had seen the truth. He said America's true weapon was its inexhaustible capacity for creation and its unshakable confidence in the merits of freedom.
So what does this all mean for us today? The core takeaway from this deep dive, from all these sources, is that America won the propaganda war against Nazism not through clever messages, but through, what was the phrase, sheer, inescapable reality.
Exactly. Every electric light on a Texas farm, every full meal served, every flush toilet, every tractor driven by an ordinary civilian, these were all powerful, undeniable arguments against Nazism. The POWs were converted by prosperity because their ideology just couldn't compete with the material evidence of a functioning, powerful, and profoundly humanitarian free society.
The German POW experience proves that sometimes the greatest victories are won through transparency, prosperity, and humanity. It's a testament to the truth that the most powerful weapon in America's arsenal was the overwhelming evidence of a free society's capacity to create abundance.
They arrived as defeated conquerors but left as students. And those lessons were literally the seeds that helped build the modern democratic West.
Which raises a critical question for you, the listener, especially today when ideological conflicts are still raging.
The transformation of those soldiers relied entirely on the Americans' willingness to transparently demonstrate their strengths and the prisoners' capacity to learn from observation. So the question is, what current political or ideological conflicts, whether it's about global development, humanitarian aid, or even migration policy, could be better addressed not through forceful coercion or by just telling people what to believe,
but through the transparent, overwhelming demonstration of a superior system's actual results and its inherent humanity.
The power of confident example, it seems, is still the most persuasive force on Earth.
That is a profound thought to end on, connecting history directly to the present. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.